This is a film about Kenilworth Castle. These pictures show the reconstructed vision of what Kenilworth Castle used to look like. They are imagined visions using factual material which is used to lay out images of how the castle could have looked before the demolition. There are a number of visual reconstructions and a model of how it was previously mapped out. It was a grand castle with a large grounds and could have adopted any one of these forms at particular times. It was said about Kenilworth Castle, it was the glory of all these parts and for many respects may be ranked in the third place, at least with the most stately castles of England. This was taken from a passage by the famous 17th century antiquary Sir William Dugdale. In the 1120s, Kenilworth Castle was built and was mostly a royal castle through time. It was made especially strong by being surrounded by water. It was built in the 1120s by the Royal Chamberlain Geoffrey de Clinton, and as a celebrated construction, it was acquired by Henry II in the 1180s. During the 500 years after its emergence as a castle, it was expanded and developed. The royal palace it became was largely due to its strategic importance. It had a very strong structure with huge walls. In the early 13th century, King John added stone walls and built a dam to keep off a lake. It was transformed into a hugely strong fortress. In 1266, it was able to last in a siege of over 6 months. In 1253, Henry gave the castle to his sister Eleanor and her husband Simon de Montfort. The king granted the castle to his son Edmund Crouchback, who held a round table of knights in 1279. In 1390, the Great Hall was expanded and further construction to strengthen and expand continued. In 1399, the castle was returned to the crown. In the 15th century, the Lancastrian kings inhabited the castle. In 1563, Elizabeth I gave it to Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, who transformed it into a palace. Elizabeth was invited to festivities in 1575. "Live here, good queen, live here. You are amongst friends. Their comfort comes when you approach, and when you part it ends." This was a farewell to Elizabeth I at the end of her visit to Kenilworth Castle in 1575 by George Gascoigne. However, unfortunately the castle was destroyed after the Civil War. It is now a ruined castle. It is believed that the ruin occurred in the English Civil War. The castle was an important royalist stronghold during the English Civil War in the battle between the royalists and the parliamentarians. After the imprisonment of Charles I, the parliamentarians authorised the destruction of the castle as it was a royalist stronghold. In 1648 there were royalist uprisings and the parliamentarians were determined to withdraw any power or status the castle represented. The English Civil Wars were about the battle between Parliament and the monarchy for power. Charles I was in dispute with Parliament and he was removed from power through war. Before the Civil War, Parliament did not have much authority. It was summoned as a discussion space by the monarch and only then. During the Long Parliament, many laws were introduced and the objections to the rule of Charles I became clear, and they began to become more and more powerful. Parliament won the allegiance of the Royal Navy and cities, whereas Charles I won rural faculties. This was not helpful to Charles I, as he was exiled and removed from the throne. The reality was that the parliamentarians, constituted of the gentry and important upper classes, managed to restore a constitutional monarchy with the royal palaces accountable to Parliament, unlike today, where Queen Elizabeth II holds veto and the right to define the rule of law. After the Civil War, royalist strongholds were slighted, which meant they were destroyed as they were believed to be a threat to Parliament, as they could be used as castles for defence, attack and successful siege. Slighting is known as the meaningful and intentional demolishing of part or all of a fortification so that it no longer could be used as a fortress. Other castles as well as Kenilworth were slighted. During the Civil War, this slighting occurred to deny the opposing side their use of a fortress. The trashing of the castle raises issues about the role of Parliament in a constitutional monarchy. The original defeat of the Royalists in this context encouraged the monarchy to take power and assemble an effective rule of a constitutional monarchy with the shared legal authority and the sanctity of the rule of law. Kenilworth Castle has existed as a ruin for many years. In 1958, the castle was given by Lord Kenilworth to the people of Kenilworth, and since 1984 it has been managed by English Heritage. This poem was written about Kenilworth Castle. Tell me, ye ivied towers, can ye repeat the tales of your revelry your lords have told? Do you remember every varied feat of chivalry and gallant knights of old, who in these tower courts so fiercely battled, whose armour glistened and whose truncheons rattled?